Okay, it looks like I'm up and running on this end. It just pushed me out just a second ago. So, those of you who are on, let me know what the quality is doing. The sound okay, video okay. And as soon as I start getting some confirmation on that, we'll pick up and go over some stuff. Today, I want to talk about, we're going to finish talking about what we were talking about the other day. And and I'm going to hand out, or at least I emailed out another assignment this morning, and so we're going to go over that for a little bit. So somebody shoot me a uh, somebody that's on. Looks like there's not too many. I guess some others were kicked off too. Shoot me something on the live chat that tells me that we're up and running, and we'll sit here for a little bit and wait for people to tune back in. Great. Okay. Thank you. We'll wait a little bit, a couple of minutes here, and see what everybody's doing. I know there were about 20 or so that were online, and then it kicked me out, and I had to start over again. So this is the first time that I've had this happen on YouTube Live. So everything's been pretty good so far. I know they're experiencing a lot of trouble with the Zoom live meetings. A lot of people have been having lots of trouble with it. It's just overwhelming the system. So looks like we got somebody else logged back in. Hopefully, all of you are staying fairly healthy and busy in one way or another. I know some of you are working more now than you were uh, during the semester, and some of you are working less. So there's all different classes of people these days around the country that most people probably haven't recognized yet. So we've got working couples with children, and the kids aren't in school, and sometimes it's both parents that are working, and that presents a problem. Sometimes the parents aren't working, and that presents a problem. So uh, we've got all kinds of situations going on now that we haven't seen um, the quantities of in a long time. So looks like a few folks are starting to pop back in. Say we'll give it another minute here, and then we'll really get up and go. It does look like things are starting to turn a corner in New York City, uh, which is great. So maybe by the end of the month, all of this stuff we'll be able to pull it off and lift it, and everybody can get back to their normal routines. So I don't know. Some people are coming and going. It's showing me here, so maybe there's some technical issues with YouTube this morning across the system. You're just seeing a black screen. Yeah, the other one was the one that it kicked me out of. We're looking at two lectures. One of them is only, you know, a minute and a half long. If it's that long, it kicked me out, and I had to start over. So yeah, they were kicking me out as well too. So I'm seeing some live chat stuff coming on here. What I'll do afterwards is I'll go in and I'll delete the first one that it kicked me out on, and we'll start over with it, and I'll get it out of there. Uh, are you still just seeing a black screen? Anybody else just seeing a black screen? If you're seeing a black screen, I would suggest go ahead and get out of YouTube and then log back in, and see what comes up. Because most everybody else, it looks like, is seeing things good. Okay, great. It's starting to come online. Hopefully, some other folks will find us. Want to have as many as we can within reason when I get started, so that we can take advantage of the live chat if there's questions, and I'm sure there's going to be questions later on when we start talking about this last assignment that I emailed out this morning. So I apologize for being problematic this morning. This is the first time we've had this happen, but it's beyond my control. It shot me out of here too. So we're picking up a little bit of steam here, it appears. People are starting to find us. So well, we're about 6.5 minutes in. Let's go ahead and we'll get started, and we'll just wait for everybody else to kind of come online. What I want you to do, if you haven't done it already, is go ahead and pull up that PowerPoint that we were looking at the other day. Please do that, and I'll be referring to some of the numbers on the slides. And we're going to take a look at it here real quick. And then I'll get into the assignment. And what I want to pick up, I just want to kind of backtrack some to slide number 23. This picture of Moody Springs. This is over near Duckwater, Nevada. And this sequence of slides, as I mentioned the other day, that we're going to be looking at are areas that have not had cattle or sheep on them for between 20 and 30 years. Okay, so these are not multiple use areas. These are areas that are just grazed or have just been grazed by horses. In these examples, there's other examples with burros here and there, but by and large, the larger problem on the larger scale are horses, and particularly here in Nevada. And I think all of these slides, maybe one or two exceptions, all of these slides that I've sent you and included on this PowerPoint are, for the most part, are in Nevada and in our home state. So we've got somewhere around, once the foals hit the ground here in the next few weeks, we're probably going to be sitting at about 50,000 horses in Nevada, and nationally, range wide, our appropriate management level is only about 26,000 and change. So we have about twice as many as there should be on a national scale here in Nevada. So that's the issue, for Nevada anyway, for being close to home here. So slide number 23 is Moody Springs near Duckwater, Nevada. This is just a spring, it was at one point in time a sub-irrigated meadow that had grasses and grass likes scattered around the area that not only the horses could take advantage of, but also the other wildlife species. And so just kind of think of the other wildlife species that are involved in this habitat degradation issue that we have going on. And this is, in case it hasn't really dawned on you yet, this is a picture. These are a sequence of pictures of habitat degradation due to our management approach over the last several decades to wild horses and burros. So Moody Springs, and as you see this sequence of pictures, think to yourself, how in the world are you going to mitigate these things? Even if you stopped all the grazing, even if you took all of the horses off and did not put any domestic animals back on there, you would have to let big game animals roam. But if we took all the horses off, how what kind of recovery rate are we looking at here? Some of these areas are just, it's going to take, it may take 500, it may take 1,000 years to recover to get anywhere back to what the ecological potential was. I mean, that's how serious this is. So let's just kind of run through these through this sequence of slides again here, and just kind of pay attention to it. The next slide would be number 24. Monte Cristo Territory over to White Pine County, again over in eastern Nevada, taken in 2018. This was a little sub-irrigated meadow at a spring. But of course, once again, the horse use has been so overwhelming. They get in and it starts trying to dry up. More horses try to drink. They start pawing out the spring. It eventually can go dry like this, and they just keep pawing and pawing, and eventually the wind blows and it blows the soil away. So what you see there, and the next slide is a close-up of it, slide number 25, what you see there is just a complete loss of maybe 8 feet of topsoil. The ground level is 6 or 8 feet lower today than it was 20 years ago. And this is all a result, once again, of horse use, and horse use that is not managed appropriately. Okay, so how are you going to mitigate something like that? How are you going to restore it? What kind of techniques can you use to restore something like this? There's just not any. There is no technique to do. I mean, you could go in and you could reseed, but you've lost 6 or 8 feet of topsoil. You're probably going to lose that spring. It's no longer going to serve, and it's barely serving as a water source now. This is just unconscionable, is what it is. It's just unconscionable. The next slide, it's in Frenchy Creek, over sort of in mid Nevada, in Crescent Valley. This is a perennial stream. This is Frenchy Creek, perennial stream. There should be a green line there. There should be some willows along the side of the banks of this perennial stream. There should be grasses. Again, you see that we've lost some topsoil there as well, on the right bank or on the left bank. And if you turn around and look the other direction toward the mountain and the source of the water, this is what you get going this direction. So it's just, what kind of habitat is left there for the antelope that live in the valley, or the mule deer that come down out of the mountains in the valley, or the squeaky dogs, or anything else out there, the birds, neotropical migrant birds, sagebrush nesting birds. The habitat loss there and the habitat degradation is just, it's extreme. If we move on to the next slide, this is a distant shot from Oriana Spring over down near Caliente, Nevada. And as you can see, the same situation. You see very, very little vegetation in the foreground. You see the spring has been dried up. You see this foal, standing in the midst of all this. And if you take the next slide, which would be slide number 29, a little bit more of a close-up of this foal. Where's the topsoil in this shot? Well, it's scattered out for miles along the general leeward path of the prevailing wind. So it's just I mean, how do you describe that? How do you describe a scene like that? It's just, it's unconscionable that we have allowed, as a society, we have allowed this to happen. It's not just affecting the horses, it's affecting all the other critters out there. It's affecting you individually. We get dust blown particles in the air. It's just sad, just sad that we've allowed this to happen as a society. Let's take a look at the next picture. This one's a little bit closer to home. This is north of Pyramid Lake, closer to home if you're in Reno. Sparks area, this is Pyramid Lake. Took this shot in 2004. This is a sub-irrigated meadow up on the north end of the reservation. And again, you see, pawing of the water source. You see a degradation there. It's all eaten off down to the dirt. It's problematic if you're another species. The next slide, Ellie Spring down near Caliente. It's a little bit higher elevation area, but it's the same. The same thing is going on here. It's just a horse-only grazing area. There's been no cattle in there because there's nothing for the cattle to eat, and so the horses have just been, given free rein. Notice what they've done to the riparian zone there, to the creek. If domestic animals, cattle and sheep, were managed in such a way so that this was occurring, the entire country would be up in arms about it. But for some reason, because it's been horses for all these years, it's just been let go and been overlooked, and so this is what we're left at this point in time. The next slide number 32, is over in southwestern Utah. We just took these pictures. Was it last spring? Yeah, last spring, a year ago. This is one of the few water sources in the area. The degradation hasn't reached quite the level that some other areas had that you've been seeing in previous slides, but you see what the ecological potential here is. You've got grasses there, sort of a sub-irrigated type meadow area. You've got a water source, excuse me, that the horses are utilizing. But you are starting to see some degradation there due to these horse overpopulations and horse use. The next slide is a little closer to home. This is down south of Dayton. I took this slide just, actually it was about this time last year. We have a grazing exclosure, and this is in the bi-state sage grouse area. We have this grazing exclosure that's been there for about 30 years. There haven't been any this was a sheep allotment. There hasn't been any sheep or cattle in here in at least 30 years, and we think maybe 40 years as best we can tell. It may go back that far since any domestic animals have grazed the area. There is a permit on the area, but the producer has just chosen not to use it. But what you see here is just outside the grazing exclosure where the horses can't get to, you see about 2 inches of soil loss, or 2 feet of soil loss. And so that habitat that's inside that grazing exclosure, or the habitat that's outside the grazing exclosure that you see in the foreground, should look like what's inside the exclosure. And yet it doesn't. We've lost the topsoil, and so this is sitting right on top of a rocky area, bedrock area. And so it's just the only way to increase this is to bring in tons and tons and tons and millions of tons of topsoil that we don't have the ability to do or to carry out. So once again, these are just a few examples of the horse degradation patterns that we're seeing all across Nevada. We're seeing it in Utah now. We're starting to see it in some places in Wyoming. Now, we have, not all HMAs are in this bad a shape. Now, don't get me wrong. We have a number of HMAs. There's 4 HMAs in western Colorado, and they're all in pretty good shape because the numbers have been managed fairly well. But in Montana, up in the Pryor Mountain Range up there, things look pretty good. So there are areas up outside of Boise, or out of Ontario, I should say. Things are looking pretty good in some of those HMAs. So this is not range wide, this habitat degradation. But what this shows you is that if we continue to manage all of our HMAs in the way that these HMAs have been managed, then they are all at some point in time going to get to this point. So we're beyond the canary in the coal mine here, but we do have to understand that not all the HMAs are in as poor a condition ecologically as these areas that I've shown you here in this presentation. So let's go to the next slide here, number 34, and think about this in terms of habitat for wildlife, just wildlife. We're not even going to think about domestic animals, but just think about wildlife at this point. In a lot of the Intermountain West, late summer seasonal habitat is the critical limiting factor for wildlife populations. From birds to antelope to mule deer to elk, anything that's out here in the Intermountain West. We have lots of winter habitat for most critters. We have a lot of that. We have a lot of salt desert shrub. Typically, they'll move down into the salt desert shrub areas in the winter. Most mobile species. Sage grouse are a little bit different. Sage grouse go up, and they have to find sagebrush above the snow line. We have lots of these other seasonal habitats, and our critical link, and the reason why, one of the major reasons why our wildlife populations in Nevada do not mirror some of the wildlife populations in other states like Wyoming. When you drive across Wyoming and then you drive across northern Nevada, you look at Nevada and you just go, where are the antelope compared to Wyoming? And the reason why one of the major reasons why we don't have those populations that they have in other states and surrounding states is because of this lack, this just overall natural lack of summer season, particularly late summer habitat in Nevada. It's a critical link for most of the wildlife population stability that we have in the state. So if you wipe out all of the late summer season habitat, if you took all of that away, even though it's only a small percentage of the land mass in general of habitat in the state of Nevada, wildlife populations are going to crash because these are critical habitats during that specific season of the year as they move around on the landscape. And so anything that we do to cause habitat degradation in these late summer season habitats is going to have a profound effect on the wildlife populations that also share wildlife species populations that share those limited late summer season habitats with horses and burros. Okay, that's important. That's a big thing to understand. The second bullet point that I have here, typically what mobile species do, birds and big game type animals, in the late summer, they either have to move to lowland riparian meadow type vegetation, or they have to move up the mountain to higher elevations in the associated riparian areas there in order to have green forage. Otherwise, they're going to be on dry forage and dry, for significant amounts of time. And dry forage does not contain, for instance, as one example, does not contain a great amount of vitamin A. grazing animals, browsing animals get their vitamin A primarily from green forage, and they can only store it, vitamin A, for a period of several months, depending on the species, depending on the physiological stage of the species and the time of year and so on. Uh, it's just maybe 3-4 months. It could be a little bit longer, could be a little bit less, is all an animal is going to be able to store enough vitamin A in their system in order to meet their physiological needs. And so if you're on dry feed for months and months and months and months, that's just one example of a nutritional deficiency that you're going to have with grazing animals. So, we have to be cognizant of these things when we're managing. We should be cognizant of these things when we're managing wild horses and burros. And we have not done, as a society, we have not done a great job of that over the last 3 decades, maybe longer than that. Some could argue very successfully when it comes to wild horse and burro management. All right, let's look at our next slide here. The implications of this critical habitat degradation. In any given year, population maintenance or expansion is compromised. If a group of sage grouse show up at a late season brood habitat, sub-irrigated meadow, and there's nothing there for them to eat, you're going to compromise that group or that population of sage grouse. They may not even be able to maintain their population. And so you're going into a winter with a lower population. You're coming out of winter with a lower population. And so sustainability becomes problematic for these small species group populations that utilize these habitats. Over a number of years, there's a potential for local extinction. If they don't get some kind of relief the next year or the next year, you can see local population extinctions by sage grouse, for instance, as an example. Other species are also out there having trouble as well. And over time, the ecological potential of the habitat is degraded, which makes recovery slow or impossible. And that's what we were talking about going through that sequence of slides a while ago. How do you mitigate some of those instances? Well, you can't. You just kind of, the ecological potential is never going to be the same. It's just not. And so we're going to have to move along with what we have. The ecological potential is going to be lower for sage grouse late season brood habitat. It's going to be lower for antelope late season habitat, and all the other species that use these that share these habitats with horses. Okay. So, you just look at this next slide again, slide number 36, and if you think about mitigation, and you think about the species that will not be able to utilize this area in the future because of mismanagement of horse populations in the past. What can you do? I mean, what can you do? You can start managing the horse populations appropriately, and you will see a natural successional process begin to take place. But that may even be truncated, because what may happen is you may end up with invasive species, invasive annual grasses that may come into an area like this, or halogeton, a poisonous, toxic plant. This is a perfect type of a scenario for those species to move in and dominate for a number of years. So the ecological potential is forever changed on this site that we're looking at right here in site number 30 or slide number 36. It's just changed. Maybe in 1,000 years you won't be able to tell any difference, but what does that mean to critters next year? Or what does that mean to your children? So this is the challenge that we face on a national basis with horse and burro management. And we're beginning, I think, to make a little bit of headway. in convincing policymakers that this is going on. There's been a lot of, and still is a lot of, misinformation campaigns out there saying that these things don't happen. And if we just had more room for horses, then everything would be right, okay, and we'd have a lovely, idyllic paradise in the Intermountain West. But remember diet preferences. If horses have a choice, what are they going to choose? It doesn't make any difference how much more area you have on top of the mountain or have out in the valley that may be available to them. If they don't utilize it, if they prefer not to utilize it, they're going to go to these areas still, and they're going to cause this degradation, or they're going to branch out into other areas that they are currently not in, they're currently not assigned to, and they're going to create, and mismanagement is going to create this degradation in more and more areas across the Intermountain West. So once again, if you've got a box, right, and it's got dysfunction in it, if you take that dysfunction out and you put it in a bigger box, all you have now is dysfunction in a bigger box. You haven't fixed anything. You haven't changed anything. You've just broadened the scale of the dysfunction. And so that argument by a lot of horse advocacy groups, so-called horse advocacy groups, is it's not credible. It's just not credible, and it's up to you as an individual to make sure that when you hear these conversations, or when you see something in the paper, or you see something on the internet, maybe you need to make a response to it, and make sure that, because these are your public lands, and the management of horses and burros over the last 3 to 4 decades has been controlled by the least informed people in the room. And that has to stop, or we're going to continue to see this kind of degradation go on and expand across the Intermountain West. Let's look at this next slide here, the implication. Now, this is an important thing to understand. The presence of horses and burros is not the challenge. There may be a few individuals out there that just don't like horses and burros and don't want them on public lands. There's always someone under the curve, the bell curve, that may have that opinion. But by and large, all of the multiple users that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, from sportsmen's groups to wildlife management groups to livestock producers, no one wants to get rid of all the horses. They want to see the horses out there. And so it's not the problem. The horses are not the problem. Okay, the horses, they're sort of innocent bystanders in this whole thing, in a way. It's not the presence of horses and burros that's the challenge. The challenge is the management of horses and burro intensity in a manner that's with appropriate management levels, in a manner that ensures resource damage doesn't occur. We can do that if we're given the tools, if we're turned loose and we're given the tools to do that. And the tools that we need at this point are the gather process and contraception. And when you take one or both of those away, if you truncate that, if you, through litigation, just because you don't want it to happen, or if someone does that through litigation just because they don't want it to happen, or because they make money off of doing that, because a lot of the business models for horse advocacy groups are based on litigation. And if you don't have controversy, it's hard to get somebody to write a check for you to continue to in that process. So it's not the horses that are at fault here, it's the management. And it's our inability to manage horses at appropriate levels that have caused this degradation and will continue to cause this degradation. Once again, here in about a few weeks, we're going to have 100,000 horses on the ground, on range wide. We're going to have somewhere around 50,000 horses on the ground in Nevada. alone. We've got about 45 to 50,000 horses on a pension in long-term holding right now that the taxpayer, you, are taking care of. And so the scale of the problem, if you can imagine, to get to AML, to get to range wide, to get to AML, we're going to have to do something with about 75,000 horses. And we're going to have to add those to the 50,000 that we already have in long-term holding. So we got 125,000 horses that we're going to have to find something to do with, some way to take care of in order to alleviate this problem, this challenge that we have on our public lands. Have you ever seen 125,000 of anything? Jelly beans, M&Ms, dollars in a pile in one place? I mean, physically seen 125,000 of something in front of you. If you can imagine that in some way, that's what we have. But each of these animals weighs 800 pounds, to 800 to 1,000 pounds. So it's physically imposing the scale of the problem that we have to consider. And so we need to be able to gather, and we need to be able to administer contraception. We see the models now that we have. If we can interdict right now, get in there with gathers, with a combination of gathers and different methods of contraception, we can do this. We can get down to AML within about 10 years. It took us decades to get into this mess. It's going to take some time to get out of it, but we're starting to see some plans and our way out of this challenge that we have. And so we've got to manage our equid grazing intensity. Once again, we can't manage time and duration, but we can manage the intensity if we're allowed to do it. And so I'll end up in this deal with this little picture of some Przewalski horses once again in northwest China. If you ever wondered what northwest China and Kazakhstan, much of Central Asia looks like, that's what it looks like right there. This is a fall shot of some of that same habitat area that I showed you early on. So I'm going to open it up for questions on the live chat. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to sort of see if anybody wants to ask some questions. And then I want to get into the assignment that I emailed out this morning. So shoot me some questions while I'm changing gears here to look at that assignment. And I would suggest that you look at the assignment as well. Go ahead and pull it up and take a look at it also. That's what I am doing right now. Who knows what the lag time is off and on this morning. Hopefully everything's still up and running. Looks like there's over a good number of you logged on now looking at things. So no questions? Okay. I'll keep my eye peeled to see if anything comes in as we proceed through what we're going to do next. All right, normally, oh, here we go. More coming. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, the question, and I'm not sure what each of you can see. Some of you may be able to see the live chat questions. Some of you may not. This business about population modeling with horses versus the appropriate management level. There's been some modeling on it. There's not a lot of information that I know of out there on population modeling for wild horses. Obviously, there is some level, some herd level that is not sustainable on the long run genetically. Um, in most cases, on HMAs, horse management areas, there's more than one band of horses, and so there is genetic movement in between those different bands over time. Um, there has we started out with AMLs and with the initial AMLs, and those initial AMLs were set based on habitat. And each time a new range management plan or allotment management plan or some NEPA plan at some level goes into place, they have to take into consideration horses. And so one of the other arguments is that the BLM just sort of artificially pulls these things out of these levels in each AMA out of the air, but they don't. They have to go back and they have to take a look and see what the carrying capacities are for these areas, and then make some judgment calls associated with that. So it's pretty clear that horses can do quite well in these habitats in the Intermountain West, and so we just don't. The genetics folks just don't. They have no reservations about the genetic stability of herds. We can, if we have to, and we do this. We do move studs around. We do manage the genetics of some of these herds already, and so no one sees that as being an issue at this point in time. You have to dig around, and I would have to dig around. I'd have to make a phone call or two to get really up to date on that. But there's just not. That's more of a bogus issue than anything else. It's just not something that we are concerned about at this point in time. We're so far above AML now that that point is moot anyway. But it's not a big concern at this point by most professionals. There could be some local issues from time to time, but this is just it's not a big issue that should stop all management of horses, and typically that's what it falls into, is they want to use that as an excuse to just not do anything with respect to management. Sorry, I'm like, can we start over? No, we can't start over. I don't know what this virtualizing reality is here. What I'm going to do about grades, I got a question about grades. I'm going to give you one last chance. If you don't have stuff into me by 5 o'clock this afternoon, I'm going to grade what you sent me. I'm going to grade the last thing that you sent me. And once I get through homework 4 and 5, I'll try and get some stuff out to you on where you're sitting with grades. So that may be as early as tomorrow afternoon or Friday, potentially. So, okay, let's look at the guidelines for this assignment here. We only got about 5 minutes left, so let's try and get to it quickly, and then we may have to come back to it a little bit later. What this amounts to, this is going to take the place of what we usually do as a mock congressional hearing, what I call a mock congressional hearing. We do have sort of a congressional hearing in class. We can't do it, so this is going to substitute for this, and it is going to allow you and require you to interact with professionals in the field, with professionals in the horse and burro community. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign you someone, and there's going to be probably 5 to 6 of you per person that I have sort of set up. I've got 10 or 11 of them now. You're going to have to make an initial contact by email. You're going to have to set up a phone call time. You're going to have to develop questions to ask them, like you are a reporter, so to speak. You're going to develop the questions, and so that you're going to ask them in the interview. I don't, I don't need to approve them, but I would suggest that you come up with some very thoughtful, professional questions that you can ask them. Again, professionalism. We want to push professionalism in the class, and you will write up a little summary report that you will hand in to me. You can read this for yourself here at the end of the semester. What I want you to do in the meantime, before I give you the names of who each individual is going to call, and this is an individual project. This is not a group project. There's just going to be 5 or 6 of you that are going to be, there's not enough people to go around for you to call. So there's going to be 5 or 6 of you that's going to call a single person. There's some guidelines in here for that. Don't take more than about 20 minutes of their time. They're busy people. What I suggest in the meantime, again, before I give you the name and the email contact of the person, I'm going to do that by lottery. I would suggest that you start doing your research. If you're a journalist, and you aren't journalists, but the principle still applies. If you're going to be professional, you got to do some research before you go and start asking questions. Because if you don't do your research, your interviewee is going to know it in about 2 sentences, and they're going to get frustrated. Believe me, I get interviewed all the time, from National Public Radio to National Geographic to Fox News. I get interviewed all the time. And if somebody calls me up, a journalist calls me up for an interview, and if I can tell in about 2 sentences if they've done any research at all, and if it's going to be a hit piece, or if they're actually there asking for useful, relevant information. Okay? And so be professional about it. Be as professional as you can be. Create the most thoughtful questions that you can come up with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you who your contact is going to be, and I'm going to give you their expertise. And so you're going to you can ask general questions about the project, about the challenge and the subject, but you need to ask a couple of specific questions as well that pertains to their expertise. It might be outside of your expertise, but you need to generate those questions, some of those questions regarding their expertise. Okay, and their expertise is usually pretty broad, but they do have specific expertise that they can bring to bear on the challenge. So I'm sure there will be more questions on this. And what we'll try to do is we'll try and get to them on Friday. I just wanted to sort of introduce this. I've got some research information here for you. There's several videos. There's several website links that you can go to and start getting a handle on it. One of the others that you need to take a look at is the Bureau of Land Management webpage on wild horses. It has all of the statistics in it. I sent you a paper, I think on Monday, on a potentially new public-private partnership using tax credits for long-term holding. Absorb everything that you can learn in the meantime and so that you can develop some questions that you're going to ask over your telephone interview. Okay, so we're rolling up on time to shut down here. If you got a quick question or two, go ahead and shoot it to me on the live chat. If you have other questions, you can always email me. Once again, if you're gonna, everybody's gotten a chance to redo their homework at least once, maybe several times. If you don't have it to me by 5 o'clock, close the business today, I'm going to grade the last one I got from you. So I got to draw the line and pull the trigger somewhere here and end this thing. So we want to get through all of this math stuff. What I will do at the end too is I'll send out some the keys so that you'll have those at your disposal, because it will be a take-home test, but on the next exam there will be some of these math questions on there. So keep that in mind. No questions? No live chat questions? I still don't know who virtualizing reality is. Maybe we've been hacked. Okay, I don't see anything coming up. Look over that assignment, digest it as best you can. If you have specific questions, you can wait till Friday, or you can give me an email, and I will do my best to try and answer it. This is something that I've had to kind of cook up, and I think I've thought my way through it well enough to where everything should work okay. So, all right then. Hang and rattle. See you on Friday.